And I know a lot of people back home know about your gift and fixing things. And there was a guy at the church that you went to who knew that about you, and he approached you. And it's kind of what brought you here to ITEC. So tell us a little bit about your experience with ITEC and what led you here. The big decision to move to Florida, to leave the place that you lived your whole life, where I was born and raised. Tell us about that decision.
Yeah, so I had a shop at my house, and I did a lot of work for a lot of people. And what started out to be for support my family ended up kind of being to help people. I mean, primarily. And so a guy that had traveled with ITEC, a dentist in our town, he brought I was doing some work for his son, and Ernie, he didn't even know that I did this kind of thing at home. So he began to bring things to my house, and very regularly.
Things that needed repair?
Yeah, like chainsaws or primarily chainsaws, I think is what he brought. I think I had a pressure washer or something a time or two. But anyway, it was small engine stuff. And we would start bringing stuff to my house just randomly. And I thought, well, that's kind of odd. So he had, and I know Ernie was really heavy into missions and going and doing foreign training or traveling. And so he asked me if I'd ever had watched the movie The End of the Spear. And I said, no, I haven't. So he said, I brought you a copy. I want you to watch it. I said, okay. So my wife and I, we watched it. And he asked me about it later, what I thought about it. And I said, well, it was a very interesting movie. I wasn't exactly sure what he was looking for. And so he said, well, Dave, we're going, and he names this country in Africa. That's really funny name. It was to me. And he said, would you like to go to this country? And I just looked at him. I'm like, they make a pill for that, don't you? It sounded like a disease. I mean, I didn't even know what he meant. I said, what do you mean? He said, no, it's in Africa. And I said, okay. Well, let me think about it. He said, we need to know soon. We're buying tickets. I'm like, whoa. So I go in the house. I tell my wife that this offers, he's offered me to do this. And, I'm really looking for her to say, well, you can't because of blah, blah, and no, not at all. Oh, so you thinking you're going to do it, huh? I think you probably will. I said, no, I don't know. So that night I prayed about it that night. And this was just completely out of the blue. And I knew I had to go. I knew I had to. So that was my first experience with ITEC, was going on that trip. And, yeah.
So that was a short-term training trip you went on.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ernie was a training dentist.
Mm-hmm.
And you went to train in mechanics.
Correct.
And so what did that look like?
Well, I didn't have any idea what to expect. Mm-hmm. I had zero expectations. I had no idea. So when we got there, it was hot. Mm-hmm. And you were there.
I was there. Yeah. We were training in film.
Right.
On the film team.
Exactly.
And so for those that might have cell phones, ever left them out in the dashboard of the car and they overheat, this was happening in the shade.
Oh.
Everything was just overheating.
In the shade.
Yeah, it was hot. So
very hot. I didn't know what to expect, so we show up and I'm just kind of following, B's lead. I'm just following his lead, who was heading up the training. And, I was about 2 days into this, maybe 3 days, and we were sitting in that building, that shed that we were training in, and it was James and Steve and I were sitting there, and I wasn't really sure what was happening. I just wasn't sure. So they were kind of talking back and forth to each other, and I was just sitting there, trying to nibble on something and drink some water, and And I heard one of them say, I'm not sure he hasn't said anything yet. And I realized they were talking, to me. And I turned around and I said, what was it? And Steve said, well, James asked me what you thought about the training. He said, you haven't said a word about what you thought about it or anything. And I said, man, this is something I've got to be a part of. This is not something that I'm going to quickly be over. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people's had those mission trip experiences, and you think,
right.
But I had enough of those to know this is not what this is.
Right.
But I didn't know what was going on. I had zero idea what was happening to me, and so, So after that trip, sometimes my processor's slow, and I came home, and Kristen and Kyle were living in Maryland at the time. And so the day after we got back, or maybe the next day, we were going to drive to Maryland. And I haven't even spoken a word to Donna, because I didn't know what to tell her. I just didn't know what to tell her. So we're in the car, and I remember exactly where we were. We were about an hour up the road of an 8-hour drive. And I said, I think I want to talk to you about this trip some. And so she says to me, well, let me tell you, what God has done for me. So she said, when I pulled up to our house one day, I'd been gone maybe 2 or 3 days. She said, this is the home we lived and raised our children in. And she said, I pulled up and I just stopped and looked at our home and whatever. And she said, God just said to her, this is just a house. You can let all this go. And so quite frankly, I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to hear that. I'm like, whoa, we need to pump the brakes here a little bit. I was not going there. And so I told her I wasn't sure what happened, and then, what all God was doing. But so we came home from Maryland, and soon after that, we made a trip down to Florida. And at that time, I just said, I would really like to be a part of, if I could, 2 trips a year. I really thought that would be a fix for me. Mm-hmm. Get a couple trips a year in, that'll scratch that itch, and we'll just get on with life. Oh man, that didn't happen. 2 trips a year just didn't do it. So I just continually thought about ITEC every day. I mean, every day. And so finally, one December of 20, I'm sorry. Our pastor preached, it was Christmas, and he preached a sermon on the announcement to Mary, announcing the birth of the Savior. And just how that whole birth of her being a virgin and the whole culture of not being accepted, and how everyone wasn't going to understand, but how God used, that's the way the Savior was going to come into the world. And what might have appeared to be risk for her, because it didn't make sense. Mm-hmm. But God had called her to do it. And in spite of everything that could have happened to her, she said yes. And even Joseph, he had the same thing going on. And he said, everybody's never going to understand when God calls you. They're not going to understand. It's not going to make sense to you.
Right.
And so I knew then. So I came home and I talked to Donna about that. And she said, well, you need to call and talk to Jamie. And I said, I'm not calling him today. I'll be over this tomorrow. Well, I wasn't over it tomorrow. And so I called him, and then I drove down. 2 days later, I was here. That was Sunday. That was Monday. That Wednesday, I was here. And I had made that decision there that we were coming here. We were just leaving everything.